Hi, Guild members. It's Umpire LaFondiose. A quick update. We are getting ready for our next go round. We're going to have the invites out for Monday. I think you'll enjoy this next one. Nice, complex, lots of lessons we learned on how to administer the games will be applied. It's going to be a fun one. I've been reading up on the Franco-Prussian War, and I saw something that was very interesting, and I thought I'd send this out in as a morale booster for those of you who feel like there's too much friction or fog of war in games and that things don't go according to plan and that perhaps there's some sort of unrealism when dispatches go awry or things like that. So Field Marshal Moltke is the object of much of our study. And of course, he's considered one of the greatest staff planners and creators of staff planning processes in certainly of his generation, one would say of all time. But let it never be said that Moltke and his staff were not really, really good at setting out orders and plans and getting them in motion. In the beginning of the Franco-Prussian War, the initial thought was that the French were going to attack. So the first plans on the Prussian side were a defensive plan along the Rhine. And this defensive plan was going to take into account the fact that the French were declaring war, the French were more aggressive in their posture, and in fact, they were probably going to attack. But in fact, the French deployment and mobilization was so awful that they couldn't get anything going. And even though the Emperor Napoleon of the French had planned for an attack, they were in no shape to get an attack going. In fact, they had planned on almost 350,000 soldiers to be mobilized, and in the end, they only had like 230,000. So a dramatic miss on that. So all they could really do was crouch at the border. Moltke saw this and took advantage of it and was delighted, of course. His mobilization went much more smoothly, and he had assembled 3 armies on the border, and it was his time to attack. So here's a graphic that shows Moltke's plan. We'll start in the east. The Third Army was made up of forces from southern Germany, and it had the easiest march to where the French were. So Moltke's plan was that the Third Army would march directly west and engage the French. The Second Army, though it was the largest with 6 corps in its makeup, it was the second force that was going to reach the French. And the reason for that is that where it was sitting near Mainz, in the where you see here on the map, all the way down to Saarbrücken, that entire area is covered in mountains. So they had to go through passes and get 6 corps through those passes that eventually got them in position for this offensive. So Third Army was to come in and hit first, then the Second Army was to come, and together they would make a pincer, much like the Battle of Königgrätz, where the Austrians were defeated in 1866. The First Army was the smallest. It was comprised of only 2 corps. It was to move southwest and actually threaten the French flank. So if there were any reinforcements, it was going to just kind of make the point. So the entire plan was a redo of Königgrätz. And Moltke had in this plan, march separately, fight together. It was a very simple plan. So what actually happened? So you feel a little bit better about your own experiences in the game. In fact, the Third Army, which was going to be the first to engage, it had a diverse set of units that were part of it because it was from southern Germany, and the southern Germans weren't always on the Prussian side, so they were a little more reluctant. And their supply trains had not arrived, and there was a delay of almost 5 days in starting their march. And Moltke was very angry about this, and he sent one of his staff members down to check on it, and the staff member verified, yes, they can't move because they don't have their supply trains. So even the vaunted Prussian system didn't get that part of the mobilization right. So the Third Army could not move. The Second Army, getting through those mountains, was much worse than they had expected. In fact, the entire army and its 6 corps were spread out over 50 miles. So there was no way it was going to concentrate to hit the French. So that wasn't working. And finally, Steinmetz, who was the commander of the First Army, just literally disagreed with Moltke. And he said, he went over Moltke's head and went straight to the king and said, I disagree with Moltke's plan. I'm going to attack. So he diverted from his ordered path and actually cut across the march path of the Second Army. So Third Army couldn't move. Second Army spread out all over the mountains, and then the First Army just says, "Forget it, I'm going in." Right. So in the end, of course, the Prussians won both phases of the Franco-Prussian War, and Moltke in this case was able to adjust his planning and move forward. But when we look at our own games and think about initial planning and how things go, and can things go terribly wrong, even the best of the best, one of the greatest of all time in terms of staff planning and preparation, Field Marshal Moltke actually had his plan go horribly, horribly wrong. Hope that gives you some morale boost, and I look forward to all the great planning that's going to happen in the next game.